Hi Shiva.
Hi. So we have a lot of new things.
What?
You see below, unsure of what to discuss, auto-generate a question to start the conversation. Tips for participants. Okay. Okay, there's some new things. Yeah, he's been working on new features, so that's good. Let me see.
Yeah. In fact, there is some questions generation.
Let me click on
Then
generate.
things like yeah.
No, nothing happened. What is your
I'm sorry.
dream job and why?
Uh,
Okay, no, let me try another one. What have you enjoyed most about the course so far?
yeah.
Anyway,
What are some things that?
we can talk
What
about
are
this.
some things? What are some things that have surprised you the most since the beginning of the course and the group?
Okay, nice. So it's almost 6 p.m. I don't know
Yeah.
if anyone else will join. Now, the problem is I was a little busy, so I could not check out the PV forecasting dataset. Were you able to have a look?
Yeah. So we'll discuss. I have written down a few tasks that we can do.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I didn't look at much the data set, uh, but I spent time to understand what is there, and I wrote down some tasks that we can do, so
Okay.
we can explore that, and instead of just being, because I felt that will be a lot better than just trying look at the data, because I had spent some time looking at the data, and I realized that I was kind of uh, all over the place, because you are looking at something that you don't know what you're looking at. So essentially, that was what's happening. So right now it's kind of clear. So I guess we at least have some idea. And I also wrote down one of the problems I was talking about last time.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I will just explain it, maybe perhaps towards the end or at the start, depending upon what works, and see if we can do something about it. And perhaps because there is another thing I'm doing which I'm stuck at. In fact, but that's more to do with, perhaps you know it. You know Binder, right? You know this My Binder online, which can help. So essentially, it can help you to set up a web app without knowing anything about web app development.
Oh.
But this one is more to do with the Python Fast AI course, where you just create an app, create a model, and you create a sort of a tool which will essentially take the inputs, feed it to the model, and then get the output from the model, and then give it to people. So in the Fast AI, so what you have to do just is put it on GitHub, and then Binder will just pick it up from there. And they use what they call Voila and IPython widgets. They use both of them. So essentially, what they do is IPython widgets will let you. Apparently, I mean, I have not used it. I just copy paste it, so
Mm-hmm.
I don't do much. But the idea is IPython widgets will let you create small GUIs within Jupyter notebooks,
Mm-hmm.
and Voila would ensure that the person who is calling it would only have access to the user interface part of it, and not the actual code. So they won't be able to. So essentially, it kind of makes the entire thing hidden behind some whatever it is. So essentially, you have hidden the whole thing behind your a wall, kind of. Voila provides you kind of a wall. So what Binder does is that, because you have Voila and whatever that you have, you can make the person, like, this was an image classifier. So the user gives an image, uploads an image, and you tell whether this is this or that. So in the FastAI course, they had bear detection. So it was either grizzly, black bear, or a teddy bear.
Oh.
So in my case, what I tried to do was I actually, so what they do is you create a model and then export it into I mean, this is a deep learning model. So you have to do it using, you have to train the model using GPUs, but so we did it with Colab. But then once you have the model, you export it into a pickle file. And that's enough, because once you have done that, you don't need so they create a bundle of learning using this pickle file, so you don't need a GPU anymore, you just need a CPU to run the code. So because your model is ready, it's just going to run it. For running a deep learning model, you don't need it. So in the sense that for prediction analysis.
Okay,
So,
I mean, typically you need a GPU when you're training, when you have a large amount of data sets.
Yeah. So that's why you don't need it. So what they did was they created a beer classification. So a person uploads it, and so what I did was I ended up training whether the classifier can differentiate between if the person is playing baseball or a cricket or cricket. So it's like whether it's a bowler or a pitcher, a batsman or a batter. So this is what I did. Kind of worked. So I decided, okay, I exported the model and then I did put it on GitHub and then tried it, and then it's not working on Binder. It's not working.
Okay.
So it's not. So this is one issue, but I think it's something I have to figure out now. It's not easy, because there is in the example that he showed, in the way he showed in the video, it was just very straightforward. You put this thing should work. But then there are problems, because I think he was able to locally run it with some specific things. So he's able to run it locally because he has a Linux machine, and there are some commands which apparently work only in Linux.
Okay.
And because I was using, so it worked on Colab, but it didn't work on my machine. So ever some issues, and I have to figure it out whether the problem is somewhere. Where is the problem? So I have to figure it out. And the problem is, today, for instance, I spent a lot of time in Colab and then got the model, everything ready, and then it stopped working. It was just kept on hunting for a GPU resource. So it was kept on reconnecting and disconnecting.
Oh, okay.
So if I have to start paying and using, then perhaps I'll probably find better resources.
I guess the Trump-Biden debate had everyone trying to run AI models. I don't know. Anything's possible. But
yeah, that's possible. Yeah.
Okay.
But anyway,
okay.
So this is one thing, and
great. We have one more. Yeah, keep going.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So the second, maybe I'll just quickly show the graph problem that I discussed before we can start doing the Liège data set.
Yeah, sure.
I just kind of explained it.
We lost the person again?
Yeah, I think so.
All right.
Okay. So this okay. I will just so the idea is that you have sensors used in several large-scale systems to monitor the underlying system. So we can use flow and pressure sensors, for instance, to monitor a water distribution network. And I'm just showing in a kind of way a village, multiple villages here. There are these are flow sensors. I'm just going to show it with only flow sensors, and so you have this quite often in systems where the flow sensors you have, and it's measuring the water flow inside.
And that's a direction to it?
Yeah, no, it's not very good. I think for one of this direction is wrong.
Okay.
The, but anyway, the idea I will show the rest of the parts. The directions are correct.
Okay, fine.
So typically the sensors can help to find out abnormalities such as process fault and leaks and all that. So, but the question is, in many cases, the sensors can themselves be faulty, and so it typically happens in a lot of scenarios. And for the configuration of set of 4 villages, you can actually place sensors in different ways, like this way, where it is at the entrance of each of the village, or in a sort of way where it is some of hierarchy that you have. So both two different or many different configurations of sensors are possible. So the question is typically, okay, somebody tells you the configuration of the sensors and where the villages are. So can we say something about whether it is possible to distinguish between the leaks that are actually there and the faults that are there in the sensor? So yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, you're able to see it.
Yeah.
And then so two questions can come up. So given a water network configuration that is leaks, process faults and leaks, and faulty sensors can be faulty. So can we find if we can reliably estimate both of them, that is the leaks and the sensors fault? So I mean, it's a bit absurd because we kind of assume that we know what the sensor fault and process fault are, because sensor fault, because that's like a bit absurd in the sense that you're using sensors because you want to know whether there is a fault or not. So you can't a priori know whether there is a fault present or not. So this is a bit absurd sort of a question, but you can also turn that question around. Given the water network configuration, can we find listed all the process and sensor fault combinations which we can reliably estimate? So for that, it actually can be useful. For instance, once you have a set of measurements available to you, then you can actually optimize over all those possible combinations and see if this measurement corresponds to one of those combinations. It's not ideal, but this is what you can do given some certain circumstances. In fact, this is the scenario we faced in the problem that we were working on. So for this, what we did was you can actually represent it as a graph, and you can actually reduce it to such a graph, the two configurations that we have, and the edges are the flow sensors in this case, and nodes are the villages where the consumption happens. So you can see that on the left you have a sort of a branching structure, whereas in this second one you have a sort of a hierarchical structure where one sensor precedes the other. So it's just a possible configuration. So the question is, what we did was we created a way to represent sensors and process faults given this configuration. We created a graph representation. So my interest is how do I represent this graph in Python, and then I want to create a few graphs based on this graph, and then do some analysis. Like, okay, my analysis would be very simple. I want to find trees in a graph. So it will be more likely a shortest path, not shortest path, some sort of a breadth first search algorithm to see, like, so the tree would be essentially to traverse all the nodes. I think there is something like you traverse all the nodes touching on all the node only once, something like that. There are some.
I think you just don't have a loop, right? You don't arrive back at a node. That's it.
Yeah, you should not have it. I mean, I'm showing a case where there is nothing. There is nothing of that sort. But then the thing is that I need to know, this is not the graph that I have. I will have graph something like this. So in this, you see that there are different colors. The green ones are corresponding to leaks, and the red ones are corresponding to sensor faults. And these are ways so you see now there are loops. So I'm going to try to find all set of subgraphs in which there are no loops, or that in fact the proof is that if you can find, those are the graphs in which you can reliably estimate the unknowns, the sensor faults and process. This is what is the proof that I know, but I need to implement it and see it in Python. I did that in MATLAB in a very easy way. It's a lot easy because I mean I didn't even have to do it with graphs. I could even do it with the matrix representation of a graph, and I was able to do it easily. So matrix representation of a graph will make it actually a lot more easier if I'm not working with a lot of the huge graph, like 10,000, 20,000 nodes of graph. No, I'm not using it. Then it's fine. So if I have a smaller graph, then actually the process, the algorithm that I proposed is a lot easier. But anyway, this is the idea. So, but the first step is essentially I need to know how to represent this graph in Python, and also find a way to extend the given graph in this first this page to that of this, and then create multiple subgraphs of this to find out which combinations work. So this is what I have to do overall, and yeah, but I think I found that there is a toolbox, I mean there is a module library called NetworkX, and that kind of gives a graph structure. In fact, it has some form of a generator variable. There is something called a generator variable, right? Like, I don't know. Essentially, it's like infinite. It's not. You can add one to the other. I mean, I can't explain it because I don't know very well. But I just know that. So what it essentially does is, I think even in you can do it for loops. So when you have a for loop, when you want to generate, when you want to create for loops and needs to go. You want to traverse through a list or something like that, you can actually it actually creates a generator variable or something like that. I don't know exactly, but I think using that you can do.
First and foremost, what I would say is you can just replicate what you did in MATLAB with Python, because you have an array representation anyway, right?
Yeah.
So you can just replicate that to begin with. The second step is, now if you take a particular graph and you want to split it up into different types, right? Now here we are talking more about either similar to like what I did in my circuit simulator, where you have a circuit and you have to determine the nodes and you have to find the branches and the loops between and things like that, which is a little complex. Now there may be something in graph theory by which you can use the matrices, that is the different adjoint matrix and things like that, to be able to determine what could be separate different trees without actually doing an iterative process, because I had to do an iterative process to find out what would be a loop, what is a branch, things like that.
Yeah.
So
okay.
That's what I'm saying. So but then again, first I would say just to replicate what you've done in MATLAB in Python, just using arrays. Once that is done, the next step is in terms of to find the sensor fault. Okay, again, I don't know the total details, but it is, I would say, first is you have proper sensor data. You have proper sensor data and you have a model for that, right? Then the question is, what would you consider as faulty data, right? So like for example, can you, if you do not have faulty data, is it possible to simulate faulty data? For example, can you generate certain amount of data where a sensor has a leak and where a sensor is actually faulty? So now the question then is, can you now train your model to distinguish between these two events? That is, at one case the sensor is actually correct and it's detecting a leak. In the other case, the sensor is itself faulty, there is no leak, but it's detecting something else. So would it be something that the leak, in the case of the leak, it has a different type of distribution, whereas in the case when there is no leak, it's faulty, it has more of a kind of a normal distribution or some other kind of Gaussian distribution which happens when there is an error. Because then the error can be categorized as, this is the error proportion which is actually available in this sensor network. So maybe the error is not complete also. It's not that the sensor is completely gone, it just has a significant error component.
Yeah. So one of the things is that that's one way to that definitely you can do, because I'm right now not the reason why I came to this is that I didn't want to actually discuss about solving the problem of leak detection versus sensor fault estimation, because that's a long story. In fact, why we came to decide to solve the problem the way I'm proposing it, that's a bit of a long story, because this kind of situation can arise in a lot of scenarios. That is what I'm saying, in the sense that, okay, so we had problems with labeling, ground truth, getting the ground truth, working only with operational data and all that. You cannot really find out whether very clearly or not, etc.
I think I would suggest that you first start it on an email thread rather than here, because it's fairly complex. So I think we should instead.
That's true. That's why I wanted to quickly discuss this, because I didn't want to take a lot of time. So I will post this. I will send it across in the thread, and we'll see. We can have a discussion on the group.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah.
So I just a little hello to the two people who've joined. So we were just, since we were the only two there, we were talking about a research problem that Krishnan had. So I think one of you has been here before.
Yes sir.
So you're back. Hi, nice to. So again, since you've been here, you know how it is. You can just share any problem that you have or anything that you want to do.
So previously we discussed about the thing like which I am going through. So I have not gone through the previous videos. So last week I have gone through the basic videos, and I come up with some questions.
Yes, sure.
Like if you want, I can ask you those.
Yeah, sure. Just give me 1 minute, because I'd like to bring the other person in. Is it Srujana?
Yeah, she is my cousin.
Okay, fine. Okay. So, okay, no problem. So I'm assuming you're here to learn together, or she has an agenda of her own?
No, she's working in the data analytics. She's learning. So I suggested to take this course. Of course, she is not starting the class from the beginning, but maybe she can understand, because we already have gone through the basics.
Okay, sure. So you can start with your questions. If we have time, we can do some data analysis which Krishnan has thought of.
Yeah, so previously he has given some problem statement. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
So while discussing, the Krishnan has given some problem. So that he worked in the MATLAB and he want to do programming in the Python. Similarly, I used to work in the domain of 3D printing. So my work is to develop algorithms to understand the direction of the print.
Okay.
By taking the tessellated model, surface model. So there so much of data will be there as a nodal points of each facet. So that time since we are working with the this notepad, right? Notebook, sorry,
Right.
Jupyter notebook. So if we want to write thousands of lines, is it possible to write in the Jupyter notebook because it is server connected and so much data? If it goes into that, it will be delayed, or will it work properly?
It's like this. I would never recommend Jupyter Notebook if you're trying to do any really heavy computation. If that is the case, I would always say write it in a file and execute the file. Jupyter Notebook is a great way to do like exploratory data analysis, like you have a data frame and you're trying to figure out what to do and things like that. That is where I would recommend. But if you are trying to like actually solve, like you're trying to train a model or something of that sort, of course some people do train models in Jupyter Notebook, but it will be much faster if you do it in a file.
Okay, then I have to shift for the spider.
No, actually that's the thing. If you look into my videos, you can just create an environment or install your packages in that and then execute any Python file in that environment.
Okay, okay. But the thing is that the kind of output which we get in the MATLAB or visual like graphics, can we get in that also?
I think so. You can generate plots. You can even write to a file. You can print it on the console. So you can do almost everything. Only thing you cannot get interactive help. Like for example, if you want to see what is the type of a variable, right? Then in Jupyter Notebook you can just quickly just say type of some variable X, right? And you can find out what it is. But if you are in actually executing in a code, then you will have to execute it again and again if every time you make some small change and you want to investigate.
Yes, yes. So since like the problem statement which we get generally is new, so it is better if we have this kind of environment where I can have the value of the variable, or if you want to see the how the variable is working. So that time, like if we see the MATLAB, then we can see easily. There will be one table will be there where variable values will be displayed. So that is what I'm expecting from the Python, whether like we can do the similar way.
If you want to do that, that is if you want to check on the fly, then you can create a log file on your own. So for example, you can create a log file where you write down, let's say every certain number of loops or whatever. Let's say for example, you're looping 10,000 times, right? So let's say every 100 times you can write all your variables into a log file. So you can then view the log file to find out what is happening with your variables.
Okay, so I need to search for it. I will try to do that.
Yeah.
And a few more questions are there regarding.
Just Harish, one
Yeah,
just
yeah,
before
yeah.
you move, when you asked for a MATLAB-like mechanism to access the workspace, I mean that's very true. Jupyter Notebook offers that. So even what you can do is you can just use Jupyter Notebooks to start with, to play around. When you need all these access to workspace variables, etc., and then go to when you actually have to run a big code and all that, and then go to a smaller IDE like Spider or whatever that you want to use. Because I was seeing this Shiva, even this FastAI book and the entire course they have written only in entire book, or even the entire FastAI library, they have written everything in Jupyter Notebook.
Actually,
So-
that is happening. Even if all the courses which I have taken about AI and ML, everyone uses just Jupyter Notebook. But
Yeah,
if you look at the size of the data set, it will not be that big. I mean, if let's say, for example,
Yeah.
you're doing like weather analysis and you have like 100 million data points, and your training will go on for let's say 2 days. Now, in that
yeah.
case, you run it in Jupyter Notebook, you're asking for trouble.
Yeah, I know.
So that's all I would say. So to Harish, what I would say is try to use Jupyter Notebook as much as possible. When you go into your final mode to get the final result, right? Then what happens is sometimes you may run it for overnight. Like sometimes it used to happen, like you start the training at night and you check in the morning what the result is. That kind of thing, try not to do it in Jupyter Notebook, because if it keeps on going, your essentially all the data that you generate may end up in your Chrome browser. And if you generate too much data, your Chrome may just run out and crash. So I would suggest for those kind of long things, do it in a file.
Yeah, sure.
That's all. But otherwise, Jupyter Notebook, you can do a lot of things. Like here, we use Jupyter Notebook almost exclusively.
So when I ran my first code, it ran for 1 day because the size of the file is so huge. Like lakhs of points will be there. We need to understand like the each loop has to go through all the points. So that's why I asked this question. And one more thing is that when I used to work in the VB.NET also. So in that we generally create a project and we create our own modules. So suppose if we want to use the same module, like in module we create functions and methods, procedures. So if we want to use the same procedure, we can upload we can import into the new project where I am working, and I can access the same code. So can we create modules in the Python, or should we go with the you understood my
situation? Yeah, you can do that. So basically it's like this. The main thing you need to understand about is in Python you can do different things. You can create your own function or you can create a class, right? So for example, let's say you have just one function where you are, let's say, calculating the standard deviation of something, right? So let's say in that case you have one set of data, which could be like an NumPy array, it could be a series, a Pandas series, anything. So in that case, this takes an input and gives an output. So it's fairly simple, right? Now, let's say you've created your own custom data frame processing, right? Now, in that case, let's say instead of having a function, you can define a class. So the class has data and has methods. So the data will be the data frame, and you can have several methods which do different operations on the data. So these are your custom methods, just like the kind of methods that we have seen. So now what happens is, if in Python, if you create anything, right, you can put it in a folder, right, which is, let's say, your package folder. If you put a --init.py file, right, --init.py, then this it is an empty file. This entire that particular what you call directory now becomes a package. So you can copy that into any other project that you have, and you can import the same methods in the same way like anywhere else.
So can we do 1 day on this question?
Oh, sure. Like I said, feel free to bring anything you want. Yeah.
No, actually
try that now.
As we are going as a flow, like we are taking one problem statement, maybe in that problem statement somewhere it will come.
Yeah,
so
sure.
That time I can explain.
Definitely.
Yeah, in fact, Shiva, we can probably try that now. I have a project where I am trying to import modules, etc. Maybe you can show this init how to do that.
Yeah. No problem.
If you want, I can show you that. I mean, this is, as I told, this is a small game project I'm trying to do. It's been a while shut for a while now. So what I have is.
I mean, just 1 minute. Do you have any other question, Harish?
Yeah. Questions are there, but.
No, you can we can quickly answer some of them before we work.
Finish. Yeah.
I felt like when Krishnan is asking the similar kind of questions I got. So the thing is that I am also working in the domain of developing algorithms for the mechanical or mechatronic systems. So when we develop the algorithms, so we don't know like how many for loops we are using. So how to optimize it? Suppose if I wrote thousands of lines of code, maybe I can reduce the number of for loops, but I can't understand how much time it will take when I code in other way. So is there any particular methodology to optimize the code so that it can work properly? Because previously you told like we need to minimize as much possible number of for loops we have to reduce. So that is one point. Is there any other kind of this kind of things are there to optimize the code?
So one is, see, what I use so far is just my own judgment. So for example, when I'm looking at a problem and there is a code, then I always examine to myself how many processes I'm doing and is there any way to cut. So like for example, if you look at the very first few sessions where we were trying to calculate triangle numbers, we were trying to do that. So for example, we said that we are trying to do this, we are writing a for loop, but then is this necessary to do it this way? What do we need to do? Can we cut the number of steps? I use my own judgment. Now, is there an automatic way to do it? I am not sure. There may be code analyzers. I will look into it and tell you. There may be ways in which you can examine which parts of your code are actually taking so much time. And you can then examine if there is a way to cut that time. But I don't know now. I can tell you later, maybe.
Yeah, okay, sir.
Okay.
I think we can move forward. Maybe if I have some questions, then definitely.
Okay, sure. Yeah, okay. So I guess Krishnan, you can start sharing. Maybe we can.
Yeah. So you mean the where you can actually suggest how to handle multiple functions and things like that?
Yeah, whichever you want.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I will show what I'm doing for a small project I started, but it's been a bit stuck for a while because I'm just not doing much with the project now. But yeah, so I'm sharing my PyCharm screen. So Harish, you can probably use PyCharm as well. This is another. This is for some beginners like us. It's a bit easier. I mean, it doesn't have a lot of time to learn, like Spider, I would say. So my idea is to write a game. The game would be it's a quest. So this function, quest Monty Python, contains the quest that so it's a role-playing game. So you choose a hero and the person goes through a quest. So this quest is still pending. I just started this, but before that, so you see that this is the code, the actual main function code. That is, you have quest Monty Python and then quit. That's all. And then there is this game prelude. So what I have done is this game prelude is not here. You don't see it here. See.
Okay.
So what I did was I put them in auxiliary function. There is a .py files I created. It's called where I have a few functions that I have created. So I didn't know, or I still don't know how to really manage multiple functions such that, like we do in MATLAB or some other places where you just call the script and the entire script gets copied, similar to hash include in C or C++. When you do hash include, so that essentially I wanted to do because I didn't want to rewrite the function names, etc. So one way I did was, okay, so I put, if you see in auxiliary function, I have a function called display message. I have a function called wait for key. I have a function called avatar animate auto animation, and I have a function called game prelude. In fact, game prelude kind of uses all the other functions in before this. And however, what I wanted to do in Monty Python in this place, the main function was that I did not want to rewrite those functions. So I did something like this: from auxiliary function, import star. So and then there is another one here. What I did was here I just imported when I said import avatar Monty Python, what it does is I have created a few avatars, so few images of the heroes. So those heroes images I have stored somewhere, these PNG images, and I'm including them in a class. They are in part of a class and subclass or whatever. I mean, that's not important right now. But again, the question is, I have three different .py files, and in the main Monty Python file, I need access of all the other two functions and variables that are present in the other .py files. So I did a very crude way. I don't even know, because I have seen people say that you should never do import star.
Yeah.
I don't know. So I know that it's probably not a good way, but I don't know what is the right way to do. So I was thinking that because you were suggesting something on that line to Harish, maybe you can suggest what to do for this, and perhaps that will be helpful to answer some part of Harish's question.
Okay. So the first thing is, the reason why I say this is not a good idea is because you could accidentally write another function with the same name, right, in two different files, and when you do import star, one of them will be overwritten. So you will not be able to, for example, if our auxiliary functions and avatars Monty Python, both of them have the same function with the same name, and you are importing both of them, though here you are importing avatars Monty Python as it is, so anything will have to be using that delimiter. But if, let's say, you are doing an import star both cases, one of them will be overwritten. So if you remember how we did, like, import pandas as PD, import numpy as NP, that is a way of signifying a particular file or you can say package as a shorter name. So what I would say is, it's easier here to say import auxiliary functions as AF, and all your functions here call it AF dot whatever, so that at least you know which function you're specifically using, rather than just using the name of the function. So you know that this function is from that package. Yeah, go ahead, somebody.
Sir, can you repeat again?
Okay, can you just write that down? I'll just show you. So, like, for example, if you
I am writing. So there is from auxiliary function import. Instead, you rather suggest, say, for instance, import auxiliary functions as, say, AF.
Yeah. So I think you got that. I don't know what didn't like it. Yeah. And you can comment that first.
Yeah. So if I do this, and then what of course I have to do is wherever I'm using the auxiliary functions, that has to be put in front. Like, for instance, if there is a prelude, I will put this.
Yeah. So you know, right, like how we did with pandas, import pandas as PD, import numpy as NP. So what happens is, you're saying import this package but give it this name. So what happens is, usually you like to write your file name by a descriptive name, like auxiliary functions or avatars Monty Python. So that's usually how it is done. But if you want to use that particular function in your code, you don't want to keep writing this every time, because it just looks like ugly. So then you would say avatars Monty Python as AMP, something like that. So then then you know where the function is coming from. It is now clear. So you will never end up overwriting a function or using the wrong function.
Okay, yeah.
So, like, for example, if NP and pandas,
like overwriting the function means, like, what exactly it means?
Okay, so I'll tell you example. Let's say, for example, numpy and math, they both have the same function square root, right? So you can use the square root sqrt method in math, or you can use the sqrt method in numpy, right? So now, supposing, for instance, you are using both the math module and the numpy module in a file. Okay, so now you want to use square root of the math module in one case, and you want to use square root of the numpy module in another case, right? So what will you do? If you import, let's say, import math as empty, and you say import numpy as np, right? Now when you want to use the square root method of numpy, you can say np.sqrt, and when you want to use the sqrt of math, you can say mt.sqrt. But supposing you say import from math import star, okay, and you also say from numpy import star. Now what will happen is the import that comes second, that will overwrite all the functions of the first one. So the square root of numpy will override the square root of math. So you cannot use the square root function of math in that case.
Okay. Yeah, I understood. Sir. Now, what we are doing is we are creating an object AF, so that can access through the function.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Shiva, what you said about something about init. What was that?
So it is
answering a question.
So supposing, for example, this here, supposing you want to create this auxiliary functions, you say that these functions are useful always. So these are like functions that you use for any data. Let's say you are now going into data science and you collect a lot of functions and you say these are functions that I'm using for every project, right? So what happens is you can put that auxiliary, create a new file and put that auxiliary functions into it. Now you can go to Google and check out, because there's an interesting article on that. So if you
I will disconnect. I mean I'm showing my okay, I will reshare something else.
Oh sure.
Or you will take.
No, you can just share it. You can share it yourself, because then you will have it,
Yes. Okay, so I will so what did you want to share, such?
So if you say python init.py file and just say init.py file, it will tell you about the package. I don't know, I think they're not seeing your screen. Are you still sharing?
Just a second,
Sure.
I'm doing it, just a second.
Meanwhile, I want to say that like now I am moving to the artificial intelligence and augmented reality. So now it is compulsory for me to learn all these things. So.
Oh yeah, no, this is how it is always. It's a good thing that you're taking a projected learning, because then you have a defined goal.
Yeah, sir.
So it's
But
very good.
always like I have used MATLAB and VB.NET, so it is very clear. And here we have so many IDs and we use prompt also. So much confusion in the Python. So that's the problem.
No, you just have to pick one and be comfortable with it. That's all. So like Krishnan has chosen PyCharm. I prefer console. You can also, there is IntelliJ. There are several. So just what I would say is try out one or two, see which you like best, and pick that as your tool.
So one more doubt is there. While starting the this session, not now, maybe first class. So you told like for the machine learning and data analytics, we have to use Anaconda. So when I install Anaconda, the same libraries will be included in the PyCharm, or should we need to include it manually?
It will be like, see, it's like this. PyCharm just gives you an IDE which gives you a command line also. So the same command line, you can do all the same things as you did with the Anaconda prompt. You can create an environment, you can install packages, you can do all those things. So basically an IDE is an integrated development environment which has your editor, which has your command line, which has debugger, that is what it means. It means you don't have to go to different things. Like for example, but then that's your choice. I am more of a Linux user, so I find it better to use different tools, but you don't have to. You can choose whatever you want.
So you are saying that
Yeah.
suppose if I
So
want to use some package, so I can directly import in the PyCharm. I can use it.
Yeah, I think so. I think Krishnan, is that the case?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. In fact, I still am figuring out a few things, but so there are so PyCharm works in a very different way than normal uh, IDEs, in the sense that there are two modules, two ways you can work on. You either install Python in your in your PC and then use that Python to run as an interpreter for PyCharm. This is one way to do it. So you essentially a compiler or interpreter, if that makes sense to you. But you can also take a specific project and only download modules only for that project. So there are this is the two modes. I use the locally installed Python. I don't use I don't create it this way. But then Anaconda also now comes integrated with PyCharm, and I haven't been able to figure out whether the Anaconda Python installation is different from the Python installation I have in my PC or not. But it doesn't matter. You can use it easily. You can install whichever modules that you want with PyCharm, either only for a specific project, or you install it in your general Python installation in your PC. So I mean, if you figure it out, so there is something called pip or conda, then two different ways through which you can install packages. Okay, whatever package that you want, you can install using one of these two. Like if you install Anaconda, it comes with something called package manager called Conda.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Or if you just install Python, it comes with pip, and you install anything that you want. Just an internet connection is enough, and you will be able to install it. I do not know how PyCharm does it, but for me, I use the local Python installation to run PyCharm. Some people use it by creating, I don't know, they create a sort of a virtual machine to work with it. But if you, for instance, if you install Anaconda, which will bring, as Shiva once said, you get everything related to data science with it. And of course, you can also install on top of it. You can also install whatever you want on top of it. But it comes with everything that you need for data science. And you install it and it will work. In fact, I was able to install some things which I was not able to install using pip, but was able to install using Conda. So it was very surprising, but it worked with Anaconda.
Yeah,
So
actually,
maybe
Conda may not have everything, because the newest packages usually go first into pip and only later goes into Conda. But even if you're an Anaconda, you can still use pip in Anaconda. That's not a problem.
Yes.
Is this the reason I recommend Anaconda is that if you are new to it, then it comes with everything, and it comes with a nice Jupyter notebook and things like that. So these are the reasons why I do, because it's a very good way to get started with Python. Later on, as you get more serious, then you can start looking at IDEs and things like that.
So as I am going through the lectures, your initial lectures, YouTube lectures, so I understood that like now we install the Python by using Anaconda. Then Anaconda has a set of packages that automatically come, like we can directly have those packages when we use Anaconda. So with the Anaconda, we can run this Jupyter notebook, and we have one more IDE is Spider. So if we want to use Spider, then automatically we can access the packages in the already installed packages using Anaconda. We can use those packages in Spider, and PyCharm also can access those packages, right?
Yeah. See, it is like this.
What I understood.
It is only when you reach a fairly advanced level, right? That is when you start needing strange packages and things like that. Like for example, somebody somewhere may have created his own package for some special analysis, things like that. In the beginning, you can do almost everything with just the base package. So later on, by the time you are advanced, you like know what to do, you would be already comfortable using these tools. So then not a problem. So that's the thing.
Okay.
So the first initial, you can just use Spider, or like Krishnan said, you can just use PyCharm, either will do. By the time you start writing code and everything else, it will now be much easier how to go on with it.
Yes,
I also see that in Anaconda now they have this something called Jupyter Lab. It's I think even a bit more easier than Jupyter Notebook, it seems. I tried it once. Perhaps that might even actually do something that Harish wants with respect to workspace and all that. I don't know, I haven't used it much, but I used it once and I see that it's a little more flexible than Jupyter Notebook, but it essentially is on top of Jupyter Notebooks.
Yeah, well, all I can say is that if whenever you're using, if you have problems, you can just come over to this session and share your screen. We'll try to figure out what's happening.
Yeah.
That's it. That's all was there. Okay, so yeah, init Python, I mean, I think it's all in French.
What is it?
It's everything is in French.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
Okay, you know what, I will just, you can stop sharing, I'll share quickly and do it,
no.
because you'll have to change your language settings, I think.
No, it's what is this on in init Python and what is it on?
So it is like this. If you know init Python file, just go to init yeah, okay. So now go to that first Stack Overflow.
Okay.
I mean, of course, there are a lot of people fighting over it. Don't go into those flame wars. But you see here,
okay.
Then it says here that it used to be before in the 3.3. Okay, now this is something even I am not totally aware of. See, if you see here, it defines two type of packages, regular packages and namespace packages. So you can actually create just a regular package by placing this file --init--py file, and it automatically creates that into a package. Now, whenever you import anything, Python will automatically go and search in the entire tree where you have and search for this function in any of the files where there is this --init.py. So that way you're creating a package, but these are not named packages. That's the difference. So what I can suggest to you is check out this documentation, and you can even scroll down. I'm pretty sure people would have written all kinds of things. So you can actually look, there are some of these things, these kind of discussions which actually are quite interesting because people sort of bring in very new information every now and then. So I would suggest check out these kind of Stack Overflow links, because this will also answer your question as to how you want to create your packages. For example, you can create a named package that you can share with others as well. So like for example, you're working in your lab, you can create your own name package which you can give to somebody else, because then this now has a name and you might even be able to release it officially, something.
Yeah. I was seeing that somebody was trying to use names of some package names so that somebody else doesn't squat that package name and all that.
Exactly.
This was there for some beautiful soup. Somebody was trying to do that.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
yeah, because I read that perhaps that has to do with.
Yeah. So I don't know, does this answer your question, Harish? This, you can also check out this, just have to do the same Google. You check out the Stack Overflow, you can read these documents to know more about what these packages are. What is a package? How do you define? How do you create a package? How do you name a package? Things like that.
Yes, sir. Yeah. Yes,
Okay.
sir. Yeah.
Okay, great. So, well, actually, we are almost out of time. Yeah, that's
so. What I will do is I will just show the tasks that I have written down.
Yeah.
So we can think about that, and perhaps if we have nothing else next week, we can try this.
Yeah, that sounds good.
So yeah, so this is what I have. I'll just yeah. So what is there? This is actually part of a paper, the Liège microgrid data, which I think we shared the details on last week's session as well.
Yeah.
The maybe I can share it.
Sir, I
Just a
am
second.
unable to get those links. Where I can access that? Those links.
Which
Maybe if you are sharing something, some question or some textbook or some notes.
Sharing link. No, these are like, see, it's like
Yeah,
this.
Okay. Here I message.
Oh, okay, you're getting the message.
Chat
The
box.
chat,
yeah,
yeah, okay.
So on the messages on the top you have a chat box.
Yeah,
so I have put the Kaggle link again for the Liège microgrid open data, and this is the data I have here, on which we can probably work later. So I will just briefly explain what is there in the what is the paper about, what is the data about. So the data set is from
Can you show
microgrid,
that?
which
We are
means
not
it's-
seeing that yet, I don't know.
I'm sorry, which one?
We don't see the data set. Are you showing it?
No. I'm just showing a Jupyter notebook where
No,
I
that
have
is, we are
kind
not
of
seeing that. We
explained-
are seeing still the Stack Overflow.
Is it?
Yeah.
I see. Oh, okay. It's strange.
Okay.
Okay. You're still seeing the Stack Overflow
Yeah,
page?
yeah.
Oh, this is strange because
I think you have to share your whole desktop rather than just share the current page.
No, it is in the same page, because in my page I see it. So when I go back and go to join Howdy page, I see it.
Oh, are everyone able to see it, or it's just me?
What do you see, Harish?
Yeah, that Stack Overflow.
Stack Overflow. Yeah, that's it.
Oh, okay, I will stop sharing and then again reshare it and see what happens. So what do you see now?
It's coming.
Do you see some Jupyter notebook?
No, we're not seeing anything. I think it's still to come.
Oh, that's strange. Because I do see it. It's a very strange thing, because in my
Oh no, basically when you share, you'll go into full screen mode. That's the thing.
is it? Okay.
Yeah, because no, we don't see it at all. Something's wrong.
Is it okay now
No,
or no?
no, we don't see it.
Okay, I will stop sharing it again. I will share it now.
Yeah.
Let's give it a last try. Okay. So what do you see now?
Janam, can you take it easy for a minute? Still, we don't see anything.
Blank page.
Yeah.
Oh, this is strange. Okay, I will try to see if I can share the entire
Yeah.
screen, entire page.
You can share your whole desktop. That is what I usually do.
Yeah, that's what. So it's called the entire screen, I think.
Yeah, that's it. Because otherwise, what happens is it sort of picks out, it decides what is the active application and puts that, and may not be there.
Yeah. So you see now?
No, unfortunately, still no. What's happening?
No. Yeah, there's something wrong, because until now I used to share only a specific screen. Even today, I have already shared 2 different screens, and it has worked. So like first I was showing only a PDF file, and then I went to show you a specific Firefox page.
Mhm. Maybe you have too many windows open. I don't know.
I'm sorry?
Maybe you have too many windows open.
I don't know. Because I see in my screen now, on the Howdy page, I see my Jupyter Notebook screen.
Okay, no, we don't see it.
That is pretty strange. Okay, then anyway, so I will just quickly summarize what are the tasks that are there
Mm-hmm.
that we could do, and or let me just see if I can pull it down. Last try. I'm going to give the last try. Okay. So do you see it now?
No, we don't.
Okay, fine. Leave it. So okay. So there are a couple of things I wanted to do. The first one is in the preparation of data. So what I see is the weather data is the data. There are three main categories of data. One is the weather data. Perhaps it comes from a model. The second is second is the data from the microgrid itself. So you either both have the PV generation and the load. So how much load is there in the microgrid at that given point?
Okay.
So this is the second part of the data, and third part of the data is the forecast by the machine learning models. What they have an RNN, the recursive neural networks, and there is a GBR. I don't exactly remember what it is. So, but then there is a GBR model. So in both cases, they forecast PV and load. So again, so there are these three different set of data.
Okay.
Now each data is present from one different points of time.
Okay.
So it's not necessarily very ideal to have data which is not synchronized in time. So first thing that we'll have to do is to ensure that we use data only during the period where all data is available.
Okay.
So I mean, while we can crudely do pick up which point is that data that particular date. So that date should be 20th May to 17th June.
Okay.
But we might also try to do sort of a small code where we go to that particular point of time in the date and then pick data only from those parts. So we can do something like that.
Okay.
Then the second thing is the sampling rate. So the forecast models as well as the weather data, they come in 15 minutes sampling rate, whereas the actual microgrid data comes in every 5 seconds.
Okay.
So we probably have to do some averaging, or dropping the data, something like that, so that we have, say, only 15 minutes data forever.
Okay.
I'm guessing that makes sense, because for basic exploratory data analysis, I guess.
Okay.
And then we probably have to look. So we can say, for instance, start looking at whether there are any correlation between the correlation between the weather data and the microgrid data, like how much solar energy gets generated based on what is the weather prediction. Can we do some analysis ourselves? Because what these people have done is that they have already done that analysis, and they have created a model using an RNN, recursive neural networks, and then are giving us a forecast. But what we can actually do is to see what is happening, and so that if we want to really verify whether the model that they have given is working fine, we will have to have an understanding of what is happening. Okay, if there is sun, what point of time, if there is generation, how much generation corresponds to how much of sun, humidity, and other factors. We can probably do some analysis, and also for me it will be interesting to see what are the factors that actually influence generation of solar power.
Okay.
Now, it is not just the solar radiation, like if there is cloud, what will happen, if does it really dramatically decrease or not, and all that.
Okay.
So it's something that might be interesting.
Okay.
And then we can check how does the actual prediction compare.
Okay.
And then we can then check whether compare the two models, they have RNN and GPR. Which one is better? Whether there is any specific weather patterns or temporal factors that determine when the models work well and when they don't work well.
Yeah.
So these are some things that we can do, and I think we will see a lot of other questions once we start doing this.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, we can do that.
Yeah. So probably what I'll do is, if required, I'll just send this Jupyter notebook in the group, Google group, which contains all these tasks and the basic description, which might be useful, and then we can pick it up from there next week if required.
Yeah, that sounds okay.
Yeah. Okay. I think we have already shot.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think there was a question here. I don't know if you want to talk about it. Somebody has asked.
Yeah. Sure.
So, hi, the new person, I don't know.
What's this? Safe?
Yeah, so this is my first time using Howdy. Would like to know, ask everyone to see the benefits of using this over Zoom. I don't know. It's just that there are a lot of issues with Zoom nowadays. So it's just that we are trying to use something else, and this is more of an integrated learning environment with everything for learning rather than basically Zoom is just any video conferencing. This is more of an actual learning platform. So the idea is like things like this are coming up, like auto generate questions, and they're also trying to do other things.
Yeah, you can even
Oh,
Maybe we lost the connection.
yeah, I think he's back. Okay.
I'm sorry. Sorry, I got cut off. So you can even give direct feedback in the screen itself.
Yeah.
Do you see that? Did you see that thing, Shiva?
Yeah, there is a new clap thing.
Yeah, no, in that there are 3 different options. So he had a feedback version in the past, which was you have to do it after the session is over. Now it is integrated, though I think it is not very well integrated, because when you move the mouse, some of these things come up. The buttons come up, and it essentially blocks things behind. So it's a bit complicated, but it's still nice. And also, one of the simplest thing is Zoom has 40 minutes limit. Here the limit is we decide the limit.
Yeah, of course you can go to a Zoom business account, that is always there. So
yeah, but that's not free, right?
Yeah, that's not free. That's the only thing.
Yeah, here you are not paying okay, for now at least.
Yeah.
You're not paying anything. So, and also, yeah, it's a lot easier. For now, I find it to be a lot more.
And since it also is in the browser, it is not really like storing any. It's not actually, because when you install an app, it can actually access the data on your computer. Here, since you are running out of a web browser, it is relatively safe in the sense that this app does not access any data on your computer. Relatively safe. Again, we don't know, but much better than Zoom. Zoom had a lot of issues, particularly when the COVID lockdown started. People started reporting all kinds of things.
Yeah. Okay.
So I think we're almost out of time. I can take one last question, otherwise we can conclude. Okay, then I think that's it for now this week. So thank you all for coming, and see you next week.
Yeah, see you.
Okay, bye everyone.